The most important thing to be aware of when doing exams is that the grade boundaries are relative to the difficulty level, meaning if there's a really hard question, then it's hard for everyone. So if a lot of people get it wrong, then the grade boundaries will fall. That means that the actual exam doesn't matter. The amount of work you've done relative to others will make a difference in grades. So if you've started early and if you've covered everything, then you'll be fine. The UMS marks is just a way of simplifying things. 80% is normally an A in the UMS, but in the actual exam you might get, let's say, 65 out of 100 marks, and that can equate to 80% depending on the subject. Mathematics is normally around 80% in the marks for you to get 80% in the UMS, whereas something like business, some exams you can get as low as 63% in the marks, and that can equate to 80% in the exam. It depends on the subject. And they set the grade boundaries depending on how all the candidates perform. Now, one thing to remember is that the government actually sets targets for these exam boards. So every year they try to set the boundaries slightly different so that slightly more people get A's. I think the January exams of the AS year are probably the best, just because so many people aren't ready for them, and that's why the boundaries are relatively low as well. Now, you need 80% across all your modules to get an A overall, and that's 80% UMS. If you have 6 modules and you can get 96% in your first 5 modules, then you don't even need to sit your last exam, you already have your A. Or if you get 90% in your first 5 modules, then in your last module you'll only need 30%, which is again nothing. And that's how you can slowly bring the pressure down on yourself instead of it building up. Would you rather at the end of June to have loads of resets and loads of regrets, as opposed to just a couple of exams where you need 30 to 50%? During the exam week, there's a couple of things you can do that can help, like having a list of all your previous results, or a list of all the things you've achieved so far, and keep looking at them. You can also, say, schedule all the things you're going to do after the exams, things that you can look forward to. You can obviously keep taking breaks, but scheduling during your exams are the other activities you're going to do as well. Now, during your exams, it's good to read a book that will completely distract you, completely make you think about something totally different from your subjects, like a deep book, something like A New Earth by Eckhart Tolle. Or you can also read a joke book. Now, like with a joke book, because it completely distracts you, it sort of helps you relax as well. On the day of the exam, there's no point doing any more questions, because you either know it at that stage or you don't. The best thing to do is, again, read your home notes or read some of your class notes. Pick the ones that you need to learn the most and pick those. Now, as you walk into the exam, the best thing to do is to read the third piece of notes. The notes that you had the mistakes you made and you corrected them. That's the best thing to read. And because it'll only be a couple of sheets, it'll be easy and quickly to read as well. Now, once you start the exam, again, you don't want to look at the whole thing and say this is 2 hours and loads of questions. You want to take one question at a time, and if you reach a difficult question, then leave it and come back to it at the end. You would have had loads of practice at this, because when you're doing your past papers, again, you leave questions and you make sure you come back to it at the end to correct it. It's so good when you come back to it, just because if there's a difficult question, you straight away start worrying. It's just normal. What's going to happen if I don't get this and everything? But if you leave it and do the rest, by the time you come back to it, that question won't matter that much. The pressure won't be as high because you've done the rest, and you sort of had a chance to have a think about it as well. So you have a much better chance of correcting it. Don't focus on the things that can go wrong, like what if my bus crashes or what if I fall down the stairs, just because it's endless. Now, it's always good to focus on why things can go right, like all the attention you've paid in class, the 3 notes you have that's covered everything, the books, the past papers, the exam techniques that you've been through and you've read. You're probably at this stage at your peak. So even if you could postpone it for 1 or 2 weeks, your exam, you probably wouldn't want to, just because you're probably more prepared for it now than you'll ever be. And as we've always said, improvement and learning is more important than the result anyway. Not only that, but again, just because everyone is sitting the exact same paper, if there's a hard question, it's going to be hard for everyone. And if anything, at this stage, because you're so well prepared, you'll probably want it to be hard, just because you can distinguish yourself that way. Sometimes with exams that are pre-release material, we tend to study that pre-release material and think of all the questions that might come up. So in the actual exam, when we see a question that looks a bit familiar with 1 or 2 familiar words, we sort of jump straight into the answer without really understanding the question. And that's a problem, because the answer might be really good, but it might not be the answer to the question. That's why it's important to read the question carefully. Reading it once is good just to understand it, and then the second time, when you read the question, you want to underline the command words or the issues and theories, just so that whenever you're answering the rest of the question, if it's an essay, all the things you're answering is relevant to the question. And you'll probably develop your own style to answering essay questions. What I do is, after reading the question, I just write 5 or 6 points to do with analysis, like some positives and some negatives, depending on the subject, and I write 1 point to do with evaluation plus the reason. So it only takes me about 1 minute to plan the whole answer. And when I'm writing the answer, I just look for every point, I write roughly a paragraph. CGP guides, APT initiatives and Tutor to You are really, really good, not only for the subject but for the exam techniques as well, depending if they do your subjects or not. Now, the examiner's reports are also really good to read because they'll tell you where the examiners think that the students' weak points are, and they're the skills that are likely to be tested again. Once the exam is finished, then it's out of your control, so there's no point thinking about it. And if you were prepared, then there would be no point turning back time, because even if you could, then you couldn't have done anything different anyway. And having a book on the exam, there'd again be no point, it'll probably just slow you down. Just like how on a bicycle, you have helpers initially, but once you have enough practice, then the helpers, like the notes in your books, they'll just slow you down. You'll probably go a lot faster without the helpers.